problem with Russell's teapot is that he invokes an improbable object, and by invoking something that's so improbable, he actually undermines his argument.
What, are you kidding me? The reason Russell invokes something improbable is because that's what God is. Unprobable, unfalsifiable. Let's do this. Greetings, fellow space travelers, BionicDance here. And yep, it's State of Daniel again. And he got a couple of video responses from some people who were explaining to him that he had misunderstood the flying spaghetti monster, the invisible pink unicorn, and Russell's teapot. And after these responses, he continues to do so. So now it's my turn.
For example, let's consider what would have happened if, instead of a teapot, Russell used a Type B asteroid with 2 craters in it. Now, even if we had never observed such a rock in outer space, based on our knowledge of rocks, asteroids, meteorites floating up out there, we would safely assume that there probably is such a rock, even if we didn't have hard evidence for it.
You're right. We could say that such a rock is very likely to exist, given our experience of other asteroids and their characteristics, given how huge and varied the universe is, and thus how likely it is that such a thing could have a chance to exist. But what we couldn't do is say that that specific asteroid does exist for sure, because we don't have evidence of it in particular. And are you really saying that a god is as probable as that asteroid, that we have experience with other deities enough to be able to say, yeah, such a thing with those characteristics could exist, a god is very likely? See, one of the reasons that Russell chose a teapot orbiting the sun between Earth and Mars is because it's awfully weird, just like a god, but also just as difficult to prove.
Here's the point. Russell didn't use a rock with 2 craters in it in his argument. He used a teapot, which is very improbable and would never exist in outer space unless humans put it there.
And this is why people say that you're missing the point, because you're focusing way too hard on the specifics of the example given and not on the point, not on the message, which is that if somebody did claim that there was a teapot orbiting the sun between Earth and Mars, nobody would be under any obligation to believe that claim without evidence, just as nobody is obligated to believe in the claim that a god exists without evidence. And yet that's exactly what the religious seem to expect, that we believe in God on faith, without any hard data. And when people say, I don't believe you, because you haven't provided that data, the religious love to shift the burden of proof by saying, you don't believe me? Well, you have to prove me wrong then. No, we don't. The burden of proof is on the person who says that something does exist. And it's perfectly fine to say we don't believe you if that evidence is not there, not provided.
And this is where Russell's argument falls flat, because when you actually look at it, in this light, it's silly. We know it's silly to believe that there would be a teapot in outer space.
And it's not silly to believe in an all-knowing, all-loving, all-powerful creator deity that built the universe, gave us souls, loves us, and will take us to heaven or send us to hell after we die. That has more in common with a fairy tale than any kind of scientific claim like your asteroid.
The reality is that you can't prove or disprove both, but you can't even start talking about the burden of proof at this point, because, they're incomparable objects. One's improbable, one's probable.
Have you the brainworms?
If that's what you think, then you have no idea what burden of proof means. Because the way it works is that somebody makes a claim, and then it's their job to show that it's true, or at least that it's likely, and they do this by providing evidence. The burden of proving their claim is theirs. It has nothing whatsoever to do with how likely or unlikely the claim made is.
So here's the point. Atheists invoke these teapot-style arguments under the premise that God is as implausible as a teapot.
Telling atheists why we make the arguments we make?
Back to peddling.
If Russell had used a rock with 2 craters in it, no one would be talking about burden of proof. No one would care. It would be negligible.
Telling us what we would or wouldn't be talking about under certain circumstances?
That's a peddling.
And once again, it's not true, because burden of proof is not about how likely something is, but about who has the job of proving the claim they've made.
And the biggest irony in all of this is that atheists are the one actually making the claim by invoking the argument. They make the claim that God is improbable.
Wrong, 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 wrong. Wrong, 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 wrong.
Even if Russell's Teapot is saying that the claim being made is improbable, well, maybe that's because it is. Maybe that's because when you claim that a God exists, you don't back that claim up with any evidence. And the burden of proof is still yours. We're just calling bullshit. We're just saying that you have failed your burden of proof and need to try harder.
Since they're the one making such a radical claim, they should provide proof. The burden of proof would be on them to prove that God is improbable.
Except that the burden of proof is always on the person who makes the claim that something does exist. And if someone is telling you that your claim is improbable, that's probably because it is. And that means that your extraordinary claim requires extraordinary evidence, which thus far you've failed to provide. Not that I really expect to get through to him on this. After all, this is basically passing the buck on the burden of proof, which is precisely what Russell's Teapot was intended to illustrate. Anyway, until next time, fellow space travelers, this is BionicDance saying don't run on automatic. Instead, please think.